Hello there and welcome to another edition of the Double Digit Hockey Show. Today I am joined by a very special guest. Been looking forward to this chat for a while. Longtime AHL play-by-play voice of the Hamilton Bulldogs and currently radio play-by-play for the Calgary Flames of the NHL. Derek Wills joins me today on the show. Derek, how are you?
I'm good, John. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. I appreciate you setting some time aside for us today on the show. This is your seventh season or sixth season covering the Flames?
Seventh season. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, we were just I was just thinking about that before I got you on the show here. I'm like, it's been a while since he's been around, but I'm not sure how long it's been. So awesome. It certainly does fly. So hopefully we can continue to have some fun as the time flies by. So let's get started here. I've got a lot of questions and a lot of comments on my personal Twitter and through my email for one member of the Flames, the coaching staff, a guy that I think you know quite well, dealing with him every day on the Flames. And in your past, Geoff Ward is the center of a lot of conversation around my part of the Twitter sphere and Facebook pages that I'm a part of. In your opinion, what makes Geoff Ward the best man for the job at this point in time for the Calgary Flames?
Well, the core group has had a bunch of different head coaches. I mean, in the 7 seasons I've been calling Flames games, they've gone from Bob Hartley to Glenn Gulutzan to Bill Peters to Geoff Ward. So I think having some continuity is really key. And at some point in time, it's going to be up to the players to get the job done on the ice. I think Brad Treliving's put a good team together. I think Geoff Ward is the right kind of coach for this team. He's got a teaching background, John. And before he got into coaching hockey for a living, he was a teacher. And I think that he's taken a lot of those teaching aspects of his career and really brought them with him into hockey. And he's learned from some really good coaches. Of course, when we were in Hamilton together, Claude Julien was the head coach before he went up to the Montreal Canadiens. And then Geoff became the interim head coach of the Bulldogs and actually led them to Game 7 of the Calder Cup Finals in 2003. So I had a chance to get to know him then. And he's always been not only a teacher, but a student of the game. But he can be hard when he has to be hard as well. But I think that his teaching background has really helped him understand how important communication is. I think he does an outstanding job communicating with the players, letting them know what they're doing well, what they need to do better. And when he has to lay down the law, he certainly has the respect of the players and of the other coaches, and he can do that as well. So when I think about the coaches that the Flames have had over the last 7 seasons, Bob Hartley was a guy who I think was pretty hard on the players. And then Glenn Gulutzan was kind of the polar opposite of that, more of a player's coach. Bill Peters, again, I think he was a guy who could be pretty demanding of the players, and maybe his welcome wore a little bit thin. And now with Geoff, they get more of kind of a hybrid coach. I wouldn't say he's a player's coach. I wouldn't say he's the John Tortorella type. I think he's kind of in between, which is what I think this team needs.
It's a good point you bring up there. It's a lot of coaches Ward's had. Geoff Ward definitely has some experience coaching. What have you seen from him from the time in the AHL to what you see now as a head coach in the NHL?
Well, I think like everybody that's in and around the game, he's learned a lot over the years, and he works extremely hard. That's the one thing that really jumped out to me back in the early 2000s. We were actually road roommates our first season in the AHL together. So it was great for me. I'm not sure it was so great for him being stuck with the first year radio guy. But for me, having the assistant coach as my road roommate, I learned a lot, not only about the game from him, but just about how to act and what to do and what not to do around a professional hockey team. So it was a fantastic learning experience for me. But he's just a guy who continues to work every day to learn the ins and outs of the games. And obviously he knows the game inside out, but it's something you have to, I think, adapt and evolve with as well, because players are different now than they were 20 years ago or 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And you used to be able to say to a player, jump, and they would jump. Now you say to a player, jump, and they ask, well, why? Right? So you have to evolve as players evolved, and I think that he's done a really good job doing that. And along the way, he's learned from a lot of good people too. So I think he's an excellent head coach and a guy who can grow with this core as we go forward.
Yeah, that's well said there. I think one part of a head coaching job that gets overlooked a little bit is the way that the head coach has to interact with his assistants or associate coaches and help teach them and help them progress in their careers as well. Being a man that's around the team a lot, how do you see Geoff Ward interacting with his assistant coaches?
Well, unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to be around the team as much this year as I did in my first 6 seasons with the Flames, or first 19 calling pro hockey games. It's been really strange for Peter Labardius and I, because we've always been on the road with the team. So it's been weird not being on the road. I feel disconnected, to be quite honest with you. So it's great to be able to watch them practice when they're in town, but you don't have that same interaction that you would during a normal season, where you can have just a conversation off the air with a manager or a coach or a player. But based on what I've seen during Jeff's time in Calgary, he does a great job communicating. And I talked about how effective he is communicating with his players, John, but I think he's equally as effective communicating with the other members of the coaching staff. And ultimately, he's the guy who has to make the final decision, but he gets the input from all of his coaches and leans on their experience, whether it be as a former player or just through their coaching careers. So it's a team effort in there. And at the end of the day, he has to make some difficult decisions, but I think he's certainly prepared to do it with his experience and the experience of those around him.
There's one decision that hasn't really had to make a lot this year, and that's picking a goaltender. Markstrom's been brilliant for the Flames so far this season, but how is the new goaltender coach, Jason LaBarbera, how has he been in this beginning of his career with Geoff Ward on that coaching staff?
Well, I haven't had a chance to watch them interact off the ice, just because the only time we get to really see them is when they're on the ice. But, watching Jason LaBarbera, especially when he first joined the team, the one thing that really jumped out to me about him was, how much of a communicator he is. And he spent a ton of time, not so much with David Riddick, more so with Jacob Markstrom, just talking. They'd go through some drills, and then the two of them would go have a one-on-one conversation. And sometimes it was LaBarbera looking for Markstrom, and other times it was the other way around. So he's a guy who I think is still probably getting comfortable in his role as a goaltending coach at the NHL level, but obviously had a tremendous amount of experience at the WHL level. And I think a really nice addition to the coaching staff. And what's great for him is that he still has Jordan Sigalet as the director of goaltending and has him to lean on. And Sigalet, I thought, has done a great job over the years. Hasn't had an elite goaltender like Jacob Markstrom to work with, but I think he's done a really good job kind of getting the most out of the guys who he has had to work with. So you've got that relationship, the relationship between Sigalet and LaBarbera, and then you've got the relationship between LaBarbera and Markstrom and Riddick, and ultimately he's kind of the conduit for the two goaltenders and the rest of the coaching staff. So it's something I think the Flames were kind of ahead of the curve on, bringing in LaBarbera as the goaltending coach, and then promoting Sigalet to the director of goaltending. And I think it puts them in a position where they can get the most out of the position.
Yeah, I agree with you there. When they formed that new goaltending department that they have there, I thought that was really forward-thinking on part of the team. And then to add a guy like Jason LaBarbera, I think adds a ton to that coaching staff. So I wanted to make sure I asked about Jason LaBarbera. I know him from his Hitman days, as I covered the Western Hockey League with the Leopard Hurricanes, and I saw the job that he did with a guy like Jack McNaughton and others, and how professional he was in his approach. Just remarkable guy. So I just wanted to make sure I asked about him. Let's talk about the goaltending a little bit here. That's kind of a hot topic around social media and around on the radio on the Fan 960 of when do we get to see David Riddick next? What say you in the David Riddick conversation? When do we see him next? And what have you seen from David so far this season?
Well, it's funny, John, because before the season started, one hot topic I know on our radio station was, well, how many starts do the two goaltenders get? Some people were convinced it should be somewhere close to 50-50, and I was not one of those people. I just thought, listen, you've gone out and you've paid this guy $6 million a year for 6 years, you're giving him $36 million. That's a significant commitment to make to a player. He's your number one guy. It's not a timeshare anymore. There's no 1A, 1B like the Flames have had for a number of seasons. So I said in a perfect world, I thought that David Riddick should get somewhere between 16 and 20 starts. And it's easy to give him the second half or the first half of back-to-backs, but where do you get the other starts? Now, I'm not sure I thought the team would struggle to find consistency as much as they have in the first 15 games of the season. I think if the team was playing better in front of the goaltenders, John, David Riddick probably would have 3 or 4 or 5 starts under his belt by now. But because the forwards and the defensemen have struggled to be at their best consistently, I think the team really has felt like Jacob Markstrom gives them the best chance to win right now. And they've had to lean on him probably more than they'd like to. But ultimately, they're going to have to get some David Riddick starts in there. And I think that there's a chance that he gets the finale of this 4-game series coming up against the Canucks. As a matter of fact, I think it was probably written in pencil that he would start on Monday. But with the way the team played last Saturday, they probably thought, you know what, if that's the way you're going to play in front of the goaltender, we better give Markstrom another start. So at some point in time, you're going to have to get Riddick back in there. And I like to see him in there against the Canucks tomorrow night. And if that doesn't happen, then you've got to find him a couple of starts before the end of the month. I think it'd be easier to do when you've got the 2 back-to-backs. But beyond that, I don't see a scenario where starting your backup 10 or fewer times during the regular season puts your number one guy in a position to be healthy and rested, hopefully going into the Stanley Cup playoffs. And it's not like the Flames have an AHL quality backup. They've got a guy in David Riddick who has played at a really high level, especially in the first half of the last couple of seasons, and was an NHL All-Star last season, played on the same team as Jacob Markstrom, the Pacific Division All-Star team. So he's a guy who he can win some hockey games for this team, but ultimately I think the forwards and the defensemen have to start playing better in front of both of the goaltenders. And once they do, I think the Flames would be way more comfortable going to Riddick.
Yeah, I agree with you there. We'll get to that inconsistency issue in just a minute here, but I wanted to maybe bring up a point and see what you thought about it with the confidence or the lack thereof, I guess, would be in David Riddick's tenure. Maybe that is a bit of coming into the season. He got in the bubble there in a questionable poll for a Cam Talbot, and then he didn't really fare well in his first start in this season. Do you see a confidence issue with David, or do you see it a different direction?
I don't think it's a lack of confidence in Riddick. I just think they're trying to put all their players in a position to succeed, including him. And he hasn't played a lot of hockey since last season, since the return to play. He got into that one game against the Stars, and that was kind of putting him into a tough spot when the team was on their heels after blowing a 3-0 lead. But, he started 2 games this season, and I don't think that Riddick has been at fault for the Flames' losses in those games. I think it was, again, more about the forwards and the defensemen in front of them not playing to their potential. So I think the team got a lot of confidence in David Riddick, but what they have right now that they haven't had since Mika Kiprusoff is an elite, no questions asked, number one goaltender who, in my opinion, John, has been their most valuable player this season. So I think this is less about their confidence level in David Riddick. I think it's more about how confident they are in Jacob Markstrom and about how well he's played this season in front of a team that's been inconsistent.
That's a very I agree with you there. Markstrom has been tremendous to start the season. It'll be interesting to see when David gets his next call into the goal there. Let's talk a little bit about the word inconsistency. You brought it up. That's been my word for the last probably about 2.5 seasons now, where I'm a little baffled of why all the inconsistency on this roster. You've seen guys perform really well, and then you've seen guys, the same guys, 2 games later, just vanish for some reason. Do you see something that's there, or is it just a keep working at it until you get it type of thing for you?
Well, there's been a lot of change. During my 7 seasons, there's been 4 different head coaches, and that's why I think that having some consistency behind the bench is important for this team with where they're at. But this core has also kind of grown together, and it was a young core for a good chunk of the last 6 seasons. And, now they've got a little bit of playoff experience under their belt. I think they've got more of an understanding of what it takes to win when you get to the Stanley Cup playoffs, and even into the back half of the season when you get into a playoff race. The game changes. It becomes more difficult to play. There's less time, there's less space, there's more physicality. And I think the Flames have a better understanding of that now. The inconsistency this year has been a bit baffling for me, because this is a team that played pretty well in the return to play. I mean, they were good in 4 games against the Jets. And I know they didn't win that series against the Stars, but there were a couple of real turning points in that series. I think the biggest one for me would have been Game 4, when they're up by a goal in the final minute, let that lead slip away. And instead of going up 3-1 in the series, now it's 2-2, and the other team's got momentum. So it's a team that has had a lot of ups and downs. I think a number of teams out there have gone through the same thing en route to becoming a Stanley Cup contender. But I don't think there's any more excuses, John. This core has been together for a long time. They've had a bunch of different head coaches. It's on the players now. They have to find a way to play their best hockey more consistently. You're not going to be at your best every night, but the good teams, the elite teams, find a way to do it way more often than not. And if the Flames want to put themselves into that category, and I think they have the potential to be one of those teams, they've just got to find that consistency. How they do it, I think it's probably way above both of our pay grades, but I know the coaches are working on trying to find it, and so are the players.
Yeah, if we had the answers, we would be the ones behind the bench, wouldn't we? There is a guy on this roster that seems to take it in the teeth, for a better term, a guy that you both defended last year, and I appreciate that you helped stick up for this player. Sean Monahan's taken a lot of heat for his game over the last couple of years. He seemed to have added a better two-way game last year. He is struggling a bit this season to score, but his 5% shooting thing won't last the whole year. What have you seen from Sean Monahan the last couple of years as he tries to create a better game, all-round game for himself?
Yeah, Sean's struggling to find his offensive game right now. I mean, you talked about his shooting percentage, John. His career shooting percentage, at least going into last night's game, was 14.7%. And prior to the third of 4 games against the Canucks, it was at 6.5% for the season. So not even half. I mean, sooner or later, the puck's going to start going in for him. I do think that there are things that he can do to put himself in a position to score some more goals. But when I look at his evolution as a player, he's always been gifted offensively. He's always been a guy who's been able to find that soft spot on the ice. He's been really lucky that he's played alongside of one of the best playmakers in the game, in Johnny Gaudreau, who is good at finding open players. But, Monahan puts himself in that slot area, and he's deadly when he gets there. Although he hasn't had a lot of puck luck this year, I think sooner or later it'll start to turn for him. But he's a guy who's a better 200-foot player now than he was a year ago, certainly 2 or 3 years ago. He's bigger and he's stronger. He's smarter. He understands when to be physical and when not to put himself out of position trying to throw a body check. Faceoffs haven't been a strength for him necessarily so far this season, but they certainly were last season and in the return to play. I just think that he's better without the puck. He's always been good with the puck, John. But without the puck, I think his game has really grown. I think he's taken a bit of a step back this year as far as his overall game is concerned. But last year, I saw a ton of growth from him. And I thought he really unfairly got a bad rap from a lot of people who, because they didn't think his numbers were where they should be or where they were the year before when him and a bunch of Flames had career years. I think there was too much focus just on the goals, assists, and points. Now, with that said, he did score 22 goals last season, 7 straight 20-goal season in the league. So it's not like he fell off a cliff offensively, but defensively, I thought he was better. Physically, I thought he was better. And if he can get back to where he was in the return to play, or even for the majority of last season, the Flames are going to have a fantastic 1-2-3 punch at center.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I really like what Sean's done as well, like you have said, off the puck. And it's a part of the game that I don't think a lot of people are paying attention to. You look at Sean Monahan. Of course, you're paying the guy to score goals, but it's nice to see him add a little bit more to his game. Now, a lot of conversations don't happen when you talk about Sean Monahan. They have to include Johnny Gaudreau. So we're going to do the same thing here. This season, Johnny Gaudreau looks different. He looks more focused. He looks more dialed in. He looks like a different player from last season, where it looked like he struggled a little bit with some confidence maybe, or whatever it was last year. What have you seen from Johnny Gaudreau so far this season?
He looks lighter, not physically, mentally.
Mm-hmm.
2 years ago, he had a career year, finished with 99 points. And for Gaudreau, and really for a lot of the Flames, goals seemed to come pretty easily back in 2018, 2019. They had a lot of big nights, and that's why Gaudreau got to within 1 point of 100 and was one of the best offensive players in the NHL. Last season was really the polar opposite, John. The points were hard to come by, especially early.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he got really frustrated. And, if you think these players, that they might say that they don't read the newspaper or go online or listen to the radio or watch TV, and maybe some of them don't. I think most of them probably do. But even if they don't, they're hearing from their family and their friends what we're saying, what the fans are saying. They understand what the temperature is out there. And I think Johnny Gaudreau was feeling a lot of pressure. I think he was putting a lot of pressure on himself to have the type of year that he had back in 2018, 2019. And when the points weren't coming as easily as they did the season before, I think it really started to weigh on him. And the more frustrated he got, the harder it became for him. This year, he just looks like he's freer. And I'm not sure why. I mean, maybe it's just perspective with all the crazy things that have happened in the world over the last 12 months. Maybe that has given him a little bit of perspective about what's really important in life. And maybe it's helped him understand that, hockey's fun, or it should be fun. And I think he's having fun playing the game again. But when I look at Johnny Gaudreau as a player and what's actually helping him have success, John, I think he's at his best when he's good without the puck and when he's working hard without the puck. For me, Johnny is one of the best players in the NHL when he's playing the game the right way at applying back pressure and pickpocketing guys in the neutral zone. And even when he isn't able to do that, he's allowing his defensemen to have good gaps at the blue line, which helps the Flames forward to turn the puck over and head back the other way. So the harder he works without it, the more he has it. And the more he has it, the more points he's going to produce and the more hockey games the Flames are going to win. So I wouldn't say that he's been at his best in every game this season, but I think he's been really good in more games than not. And I think he's absolutely flying out there on most nights. And it's been a lot of fun to watch him play. One of the things that I struggled with last season, John, for my first 5 years calling Flames games, I would go to the rink every night wondering what Johnny Gaudreau was going to do next. What was he going to do I don't sit to call games, I stand, but what was he going to do to bring me out of my seat, so to speak? I didn't really feel that way for most of last season. I'm not going to lie. This season, I feel that way again. I just feel like he's that dynamic Johnny Hockey character that we saw for 5+ seasons. It's good to have him back.
I agree with you there. I really like what you said there when you say that he looks more mentally lighter. I like that. I'm going to use that going forward here, because I agree with you there. That's something that looks a lot different for Johnny Gaudreau, and I really like how he's playing for the most part. I didn't like anybody on Saturday, but for the most part, I really like his game. The Flames shuffled the deck
on Saturday, but he was
against
the only guy.
Yeah, that's true. Good point. Good point. The last game against the Vancouver Canucks, the Flames had a shuffle deck because they're missing a couple of key guys. There's no Derek Ryan and there's no Michael Backlund. I'm not sure how much injury news you're getting for those two guys, but what do you make of those injuries and the long-term effects they could have on the lineup for the Flames?
Well, Derek Ryan's got a fractured finger, so who knows how long that's going to take to heal. Michael Backlund's injury is more of a mystery. He left that game in the first period, never came back, which is usually not a good sign. We know it's a lower body injury. We're not exactly sure what that is. I know he's being called day to day, but is it going to be 1 or 2 or 3 days, or is it going to be 30 or 60 days? We don't know the answer to that question. Teams don't want to give us any more information than they have to when it relates to injuries. So it's a bit of a guessing game for us. And again, when we're on the road with the team, sometimes we'll see things or hear things that'll give us an idea of what's going on, but it's a little bit different for us this season. But, obviously 2 players they miss. But luckily the Flames do have depth at center. They've got a bunch of wingers who are natural centermen. Sam Bennett's a great example. He slides to the middle in game 3 of 4 versus the Canucks, and he was one of the big reasons why I think the Flames were able to come from behind and win that hockey game, putting that line back together with him, Milan Lucic, and Dylan Dubé from the bubble. So they're lucky that they've got depth at that position. But let's be honest, if Michael Backlund and to a lesser extent Derek Ryan are going to be out long term, the Flames' depth down the middle is gone. And I still think they can have a pretty good 1-2-3 punch with Lindholm, Monaghan, and Bennett up the middle. But then you're taking away one of your better wingers potentially in Bennett. And I still think being able to go Lindholm, Monaghan, Backlund gives you a fantastic 1-2-3 punch at center that makes matchups pretty difficult for some teams, especially when Monaghan and Backlund are at the top of their game, because Lindholm usually is. So hopefully it's nothing long-term for Backlund or Ryan, but I think the Flames can get by short-term without one or two of those guys, but long-term it'll be tough for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Although with them missing from the lineup now, it does create the opportunity for others like you mentioned. One of those guys is Sam Bennett. So let's have the Sam Bennett conversation. We're not too far away from the bombshell Elliot Friedman gave us when Sam said he was looking for a change of scenery. The Flames then scratch him for a game. Then a couple of injuries happen, and boom, here he is playing pretty good last night. That line was really good. They factored on the scoring sheet. For you, what have you seen from Sam Bennett since he came back into the lineup from that healthy scratch?
Well, I'll preface my answer by saying that I'm a big fan of Sam Bennett, the person, and obviously a huge fan of playoff Sam Bennett, who has been an absolute beast in all 4 of his trips to the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, as an 18-year-old and then a 20-year-old and then a 22-year-old and a 23-year-old, I think he was one of the Flames' best forwards all 4 years. And I think no doubt their best skater the last 2 years in those 5 games against the Avalanche and then in 4 versus the Jets and 6 versus the Stars. You could argue he was their best player, period, last year, although Cam Talbot might have something to say about that prior to what happened in Game 6 of that first-round series versus the Stars. But the thing about Sam Bennett is he's a different player in the regular season than he is in the playoffs. And I think that's what frustrates probably management and the coaching staff. And I know it frustrates a lot of fans. But for me, you need more guys who are able to elevate their game come the postseason. And he's always done that. So as frustrating as he can be during the regular season, when he's still a good player, but not a great player, and I know there's been issues with taking penalties that are a little bit unnecessary or a lot unnecessary at times, I still think he's a guy who helps you get to the playoffs. And then I think he's the type of guy you need more of once you get there if the Flames are going to make a run. But it's an interesting situation, John, because the Flames, I think they understand how valuable he is in the playoffs. They don't want to risk him figuring it out with another team in the regular season. And even if he's not great in the regular season, you know what you're going to get from him in the postseason. So I think they'd like to probably find a way to make him happy and keep him here. But it's not all on the team. It's partly on Sam Bennett as well. And I had a great chat with him last Saturday. It was my pregame interview before Game 2 of the Flames versus Canucks mini-series. And I said, listen, Sam, my belief has always been that it would be impossible for you to play the same way in 82 regular season games or even 56 regular season games this season that you do in the playoffs. Oh, sorry about that, John. And he agreed.
It's all good.
Physically, as my phone just got hit by Sam Bennett in the playoffs. Physically, I don't think a player's body could withstand playing that way for 82 or 56 games. I just don't think it's possible. I think a good example of that is Michael Furland. So you think about how effective Michael Furland was in that first-round series against the Canucks back in 2015. Well, he couldn't even get through that series healthy. He was an absolute mess in round 2 against the Ducks because he just put his body through too much. So when I asked Sam about that last Saturday, he said, I've got to find a happy medium. I can't be playoff Sam Bennett for 82 regular season games, but there's got to be a happy medium in there. So I'm anxious to see how this whole thing plays out. I'm still hopeful. I'm not sure if I was a betting man, I'd put a lot of money on it, but I'm still hopeful that the player and the team can come to an understanding and find some middle ground, because I think Sam Bennett's an important player for this team. He's always there when the games get hard. He always plays his best hockey come the Stanley Cup playoffs, and I think the more of those guys you have as a team, the better your chances are to win it all. So we'll see how it plays out, but it's a situation that I'm sure is difficult for Sam and difficult for the team as well. But I give the team a lot of credit for the way they've handled it. Geoff Ward has not been afraid to put him into a more prominent role. He's had to now with the injury to Michael Backlund, but prior to that, he was playing on the right side of the line with Sean Monaghan and Johnny Gaudreau. We've seen him on the power play a little bit, and I think the player deserves some credit as well, John, because we all saw what Pierre-Luc Dubois did when he tried to force his way out of Columbus, and that wasn't good for him or the Blue Jackets, although he ultimately got his wish and did get traded. But Sam Bennett has arguably played his best hockey since Elliot Friedman threw that report out on headlines a few weeks ago. And I think he's had certainly 2 or 3 of his best games of the season since then. And he's playing hard every night. He's saying the right things. He's doing the right things. So it's, I'm sure, a tough situation for everybody involved. But I think both the team and the player are handling it pretty well right now.
Yeah, I'm glad you went there with that. I was going to mention that as well. I think that when he came back into the lineup and was given that role with Sean Monahan and Johnny Gaudreau, he realized what the role is for him on that line, and he went and played it very well. He was rewarded on the score sheet. He was rewarded with play time, and now he's getting another reward, getting to play center like he wanted, and he's being a big focal point. He played really good last night. I really enjoyed that line. I'm interested to see now if they can carry that forward over into the next game versus the Vancouver Canucks, and we'll see that on Wednesday night for sure. Let's switch gears a little bit. I had your broadcasting partner, Peter Lambardius, on right before the season began, and him and I spent a few minutes glowing in the light that is Juuso Välimäki and what he could bring to the lineup for the Flames. It's been a few games. He's had his struggles, but he's looked good at times as well. Juuso Välimäki could be a very big bright spot running that power play unit number 1 last night as well for the Flames. What do you make of Juuso Välimäki and his start to his career?
I think he's off to a really good start this season. I mean, yes, there have been some ups and downs, John, but you have to expect that from a rookie, especially from a guy who's hardly played for 2 years. I mean, people forget he had that high ankle sprain that cost him about half the season 2 years ago, and then he missed all of last season. You know, it was good that he was able to get some games in Liga, and he played really well over there. Played a little bit on the left, played a little bit on the right, was a point-a-game player, was leading his team in scoring when he came back to North America. So I think that was a good way for him to kind of get back into the swing of things and to get playing again. And so far this season, I think he's done a really good job playing primarily on the third pairing and primarily with Nikita Nesterov. But I just think the sky is the limit for Juuso Välimäki. He is such an intelligent player. He's got good size. He skates well. I think he's got a really high hockey IQ and great offensive instincts. And he's not afraid to get involved offensively. Sometimes rookies are so afraid to make a mistake defensively that they really never reach their potential offensively. But quite often we see him pinching in and joining the rush, even leading the rush from time to time. And I think that's what excites me most about Juuso Välimäki is that even though he's in his first full season as an NHLer, he's got the confidence to try some stuff. And there are going to be mistakes along the way. You know, everybody makes them. Mark Giordano makes mistakes, but he makes way fewer mistakes now than he did when he was a younger player in the league. It's just part of the learning curve. But Välimäki, for me, is a guy who is going to be a top pairing defenseman, hopefully for a decade for this team. I think he's going to get significant time on the power play. It was great to see him quarterback in the first unit power play against the Canucks last night, even though I think it was a new challenge for him and something that I think will take him a little bit of time to get comfortable with if that's the way the Flames are going to move forward. But he is just a guy who's got all the tools physically and mentally to be a top 2 guy in this league. And I think his growth this season is probably one of the most exciting things about the start of this 2021 season for the Flames for me.
He played last night as well on his offside with Mark Giordano. What did you make of his play on his offside? Something he did a lot in Finland, and this is like the first chance we've been able to see it here in North America. What did you make of him playing on his offside last night?
Well, I actually chatted with Juuso Välimäki prior to last night's game, John, and I asked him about that, about playing on the right side, and he said he's completely comfortable with it. And it was great that he could get his feet wet doing that over in Finland. But if you watch the Flames closely, as I know you do, John, he's been playing on the right side quite a bit. Mm-hmm. He started the season playing on the left side of that pairing with Nikita Nesterov, but they've swapped. And Juuso said, I'm comfortable playing on the left side. I'm comfortable playing on the right side. He said, as a matter of fact, sometimes it changes mid-game or even mid-shift. And he said, we'll just swap sides and I'll stay on whatever side I'm on. So, yeah, he's a young man who I think because he understands the game at such a high level and understands, okay, if I'm going to play on my offside, here's how I have to change my game. Here's what changes for me. He gets all of that. So I don't think it's a struggle for him at all to play on his offside, and having that versatility, which the Flames did with a couple of guys they lost during the offseason in TJ Brody and Eric Gustafsson. I think it's so valuable because you can play him on any of your three pairings and you can play him on either side. Mm-hmm. So having a guy that you can move around like that is pretty handy.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to do that as well. It's like you're reading my notes, Derek. It's perfect. The versatility that Juuso can play with on both sides allows for this Flames team with this young group. They got Hanifin, they got Anderson, they got Mackey, who we've seen for a couple of games. Shillington's still around. It's a young group, and so the versatility of having Juuso Välimäki, who can play either side, allows them to be able to use a Peter Lombardius word and slot these guys properly and allow them to produce and to work together. And they have such a great leadership in Mark Giordano and Chris Tanev. I want to focus a little bit. We know what Mark Giordano and what he is to this team. What have you seen from Chris Tanev yourself personally? For me, I wasn't sold on the signing at first until I dove in and did a little bit of research, and I was sold on Chris Tanev. So,
sorry, you're just cutting out there a little bit. I think you were just asking me about Chris Tanev, and he's been outstanding. No, and what I thought the Flames were getting was a great defensive defenseman. It's funny, John, when you watch a player 3, 4, 5 times a year, you kind of get that high level look at them, that high level view. But when you watch them every day at practice and at morning skates and in games, sometimes you see the good things about them. Other times you see the bad things about them. But with Chris Tanev, what I really didn't understand until I got a chance to watch him every single day is how good he is offensively. And when I say that, he's never been a big point producer, but he's a better skater than I thought he was. He's excellent at getting out of his zone, whether that be skating the puck out or making a good first pass to help the Flames get out of their own end. And he's not afraid to get involved and join the rush. So there's more there offensively. Again, never been a big point guy, but just helping to drive the offense. So he's been excellent in his own zone, but what you want to do if you're a defenseman is help your team get out of there. And I think him and Noah Hanifin have done a really good job of that. Hanifin's playing the best hockey of his career right now, in my opinion. Offensively, I still think there's something there that we haven't seen yet. But defensively, he's just been so reliable. And you can't tell me that doesn't have a lot to do with his new defense partner in Chris Tanev. Just look at Quinn Hughes. So Quinn Hughes finishes second in Calder Trophy voting last season. And if you're going to win the Calder as a D-man, you're going to have to put up a lot of points. And Hughes did. Even though Cale Makar ends up winning that award, Hughes was right there in a close second. But Hughes last season didn't really have to worry about having his backside covered defensively because he knew Chris Tanev would do that. And with all due respect to the defense partners that Quinn Hughes has played with this season, as good as he's been offensively, and he leads the league in points by defenseman, he went into last night's game with the worst plus-minus rating in the NHL. So defensively, it's been a struggle for him. And I think life without Chris Tanev has been maybe a little bit more difficult than Quinn Hughes and the Vancouver Canucks thought that it would be. But their losses, the Calgary Flames gain. I think Chris Tanev is not only the type of player who helps you win in the regular season. I think that, we talked about Sam Bennett earlier. I think he's the type of guy who helps you win come the Stanley Cup playoffs as well. And I think the two big signings have been absolute home runs for the Flames. Those two former Canucks and Jacob Markstrom and Chris Tanev. And I know some of the smaller signings haven't worked out to this point, but that's where the Flames spent most of their money during the offseason. And Brad Treliving's got to feel great about those two guys.
The one thing I've noticed about Chris Tanev when he's playing with Noah Hanifin, and it's been noted by a couple of guys, including Noah himself, where he says he doesn't have to think anymore. He just goes out and he reacts and just plays his game that way. Just because knowing what you have beside you in Chris Tanev and the calming influence he has, it's no wonder those two are the Flames' best defensive pairing so far this year. In my opinion, they've played tremendous together, and I've really enjoyed watching leadership of Chris Tanev as well. Let's move on from the Flames a little bit here before we run out of time. The Flames' next couple of opponents outside of the Canucks are going to be the Edmonton Oilers and the Maple Leafs, and they both have similar they provide similar problems, and that's high elite skilled forwards. Going into these 4 games versus those two teams, the Flames have a lot of points up for grabs and an opportunity here to pull themselves into that top 3 in their division. Let's start with Edmonton, though. If you take away the McDavid and the Leon Draisaitl, what have you seen from Edmonton this year so far?
Well, the problem is actually taking away Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, which is way easier said than done, although the Flames have done a good job against those two guys in most games in the Battle of Alberta over the last 2 or 3 years. But the Oilers, I do think that they did a good job adding to their forward depth during the offseason. Kyle Turris clearly isn't the player that he once was, but, he's a good depth forward. And Jesse Puljujarvi coming back, for me, John, he's a completely different player than when he left North America. I'm not sure if it was the language barrier or maybe just being asked to do too much too soon, but Puljujarvi looks like a guy who could really break out offensively for the Oilers this year. I've really enjoyed watching him play. Forward depth or talent really isn't the issue, in my opinion, with the Oilers. You have to look at goaltending and defense. So on defense, they're without their best two-way defenseman in Oscar Klefbom. He's out for the whole year. So that was a huge loss for them. So they have to lean probably a little bit more heavily on some of their young players than they'd ideally like to. Guys like Ethan Bear and Evan Bouchard is now being put in a position where he's asked to play probably more minutes than they'd like him to. But they've got some good young guys back there, and for me, how good the Oilers are this season might hinge on how quickly those guys can develop. As far as goaltending goes, I think it's well known that the Oilers were trying to get Jacob Markstrom. They didn't, and they didn't seem to have a plan B, or at least not a good enough plan B. Mike Smith was hurt to start the season. As a result, it was all Mikko Koskinen all the time, and he played some really good hockey for them, but probably got a little bit worn out, and then his game fell off, and so did the Oilers. It's the most important position in the sport. Last year, they had some ups and downs at the position. Koskinen was good at times, not good at other times. The same can be said for Smith. Look at Smith's last 2 games. You saw the best Mike Smith and the worst Mike Smith. So kind of not knowing what you're going to get from that position when you're not really strong on defense is, I think, the biggest challenge for the Oilers this season. You've got 2 guys who can single-handedly win games for you in McDavid and Draisaitl. But if they're not putting up 2 or 3 points between them, the Oilers really don't have much of a chance to win. So they have to hope that those 2 guys are good. And sometimes they're good and they don't get the points, and that makes life pretty difficult for the Oilers. But I do have concerns with their defense, although I think it's going to be good moving forward, and certainly some big question marks in goal. Having Smith back and healthy at least gives them an option, because they didn't have an option when it was only Koskinen. As for the Maple Leafs, I think the Maple Leafs they might not have Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl, although Austin Matthews and John Tavares, if they're not in that category, are close, and Mitch Marner would be as well. But I think they've got more depth at forward. I like them on defense more, and I think I like them in net more. Even though they don't necessarily have two good options, I think their one is better in Frederik Andersen. Even though he has had some ups and downs, I think he's a goaltender who's at least going to give a good chance, a good team a chance to win on a pretty regular basis. So the Maple Leafs, for me, two things happened this year. Number one, they got moved out of a very difficult division. And now they don't have to worry about beating two of the best teams in the league, and the Bruins and the Lightning. They're still in a tough division, but I'm not sure there's a truly elite team in this division. So I think that makes life a little bit easier for the Maple Leafs. But number two is I think they're finally starting to figure it out defensively. You know, offensively, they've always had the ability. But until you can be really good defensively, I don't think you can be an elite team in this league. Some nights you might look like one, and you might outscore some defensive deficiencies, but I'm not sure you can win a Stanley Cup that way. I think that their core players are finally buying in, at least on most nights, to playing the right way defensively and playing the right way without the puck. And as a result, you know, they've had it more, and they've been one of the tougher teams to stop in the league offensively. So, you know, I think the Maple Leafs are the most talented team in the division. I think they've been the best team in the division so far, with all due respect to the Montreal Canadiens. I'm not sure they're at the same level talent-wise that the Leafs are, and you know, the Habs have to really be at their best and get great goaltending to win games, where the Maple Leafs can sometimes get away with having their B game and still picking up a pair of points. But it's going to be an interesting challenge for the Flames, going up against two teams that do have some similarities, but I think are different in ways as well.
Absolutely nailed it there. You went through a lot of points there, and I appreciate that breakdown and the comparison of those two teams, and I fully agree with you there. Edmonton, a lot of nice up-and-coming pieces on their back end, just haven't progressed yet and are learning the game. Toronto has some really good defensemen. The addition of Jake Muzzin last year for them was really good. The addition of TJ Brodie this offseason gives them a little bit something more that they didn't have in past seasons, and I like how they're coming together. Then now their next step for the Toronto Maple Leafs, for me, is now keeping the puck out of their own end. They seem to be giving up a lot of chances and relying on Andersen maybe a little too much to keep those scores down for them. So it'll be interesting to see how those go. After these two Flames play these two teams back to back, they finally get their opportunity to play the Ottawa Senators. A lot of people are calling the Ottawa Senators a doormat, free 2 points, but we saw them come back on Toronto. We saw them play a really good game on the weekend against the Winnipeg. Are the Ottawa Senators finally rounding into form, or is this just a stroke of good luck for you for the Ottawa Senators?
Well, I still think they're the seventh best team in the All-Canadian North Division, John, but I think they're better than what we saw earlier this season. If you can't get saves in this league, you've got no chance. You don't. I mean, you might win here and there, but you're never going to win consistently if you don't get good goaltending. And a rebuilding team like the Senators is going to need great goaltending some nights, and they haven't had that most nights this season. But their goaltending's been better of late, and they've invested in Matt Murray, and they need him to be the guy. He's getting paid to be the guy, and he's going to have to be the guy to give them a fighting chance to stay in the playoff race into the second half of the season. I don't think they have the talent in front of him, even if he is playing at a really high level, to stay in the playoff race going into the second half or certainly into the final quarter of the season. But we'll have to wait and see. They're playing better. They just got a couple of confidence-building wins. They do have some skill. Obviously, Matthew Tkachuk's little brother Brady is having a good season. Thomas Chabot's a fantastic player on the back end. And I think teams have probably started to take them way too lightly. You know, on any given Sunday is a saying you hear in the NFL. Well, on any given night in the NHL, anybody can beat anybody. And if you take a team too lightly, I don't care, how much more talent that you have than compared to that team. If you take a team too lightly, you're probably going to get it handed to you. So hopefully the Flames have watched what's been happening in some Senators games of late, sees that they're playing better and doesn't take them too lightly. I mean, if they take them seriously, the Flames are the better of the two teams on paper. There's no doubt about it. But, if the Flames think it's going to be an easy 2 points, then I feel like the Senators are probably going to teach them a tough lesson.
Yeah, watch out for Thomas Chabot. I really like him. I don't remember who I was talking to about it. It might have been Jamie Thomas, where both of him and I agree that that's a future Norris Trophy winner in Thomas Chabot there. So lots of good pieces to like in Ottawa, and I'm looking forward to those games coming down the line. Elliot Friedman said it best, and I keep using it when I've talked to other people, but it does feel like we're only covering a 7-team league with this new North Division this year. Have you been able to expand your horizons a little bit and check out any of that U.S. divisions?
A little bit, but I've done the same thing, John. I mean, I am so focused on what's happening in the North Division. It's hard to really pay as much attention to the other divisions as I would like to and probably should and would during a normal season. But this is a one-off, or at least I hope that this is a one-off, where we've got all 7 teams in the same division, although it's been more enjoyable than I thought it would be. I'm not sure I love the idea of playing the same team 2 and 3 and 4 times every year moving forward, the old baseball style schedule. But I think for 1 year, it's been a lot of fun. Normally what happens during the course of a 82 game regular season schedule is that you can really kind of sharpen up on what's going on in other divisions and with other teams when you travel to play those teams, or when they come to your building, whether it's talking to managers or coaches or players, or talking to other members of the media and just kind of picking their brain. That's how I would normally kind of get some info on other teams that everybody just can't go find on the internet. And it's that kind of behind the scenes stuff that kind of helps you keep up with what's going on in other markets and other divisions and in the other conference. But without that, I mean, I do text back and forth with some guys that I know well on other teams, but we just don't have the same ability to interact with those guys that we would during a normal season. So I do feel bad in a way that I haven't paid a lot of attention to what's going on in the other divisions, but I just think it's a season where most of us that are covering a team or cheering for a team in the All-Canadian North Division, you know what, we're focused on our own team and we're focused on the other 6 teams, and there's no wild cards, so you're not even really paying attention to the other division in your conference to see what's going on there. But it's a one-off, and I think we're all trying to make the best of it. So I'm not going to feel too bad about not being as up on those other teams as I normally would be.
Yeah, I use non-Flame game days to pick one U.S. matchup to watch, try to keep up. But there's been plenty of storylines in the North Division to keep you going, and it's been awesome to watch. So, speaking of awesome, a little bit of news coming out of the Flames organization as the AHL Heat are now the Calgary Heat for a season, and your former co-worker and good friend of ours, Rob Kerr, gets to do the home play-by-play. Maybe a bit word on Rob Kerr and what that means to you and to him to be able to call the Heat game.
Well, I know Rob loves to call hockey games, so I'm happy that he's going to have an opportunity to call some games in the AHL. I spent 13 years in the American Hockey League, and it's a great league. I learned a ton during my time there, and was lucky enough to work with some amazing people, from the owner in Hamilton, Michael Landlauer, to the different affiliates we had over the years. It was the Edmonton Oilers to start, and then the Montreal Canadiens, and a chance to call a Calder Cup winning goal by AJ Baines, and Carey Price was the winner of the playoff MVP for us that year, and I've got a Calder Cup ring to show for it. So I had an unbelievable time in the American Hockey League, and I know Rob will do a really good job calling Stockton Heat or Calgary Heat games this season. It's a shame that he won't be able to travel around. I mean, most of the cities that you visit in the AHL aren't the big cities that we get to visit in the NHL, and boy, do I miss being on the road. There are some good things to being at home, but I do miss being on the road and getting to travel to some great cities. But some of those old barns that you get to call games in the AHL, I think Rob would really enjoy having an opportunity to do that. But I think he'll do a real good job calling Heat home games this year. out of Scotiabank Saddledome and give listeners a good product to listen to.
I'm very excited for Rob Kerr to be back on the radio and to doing some play-by-play. I'm looking forward to the AHL getting going, and I'm looking forward to your next broadcast, Wednesday night, Flames Canucks. Derek, we've run out of time. I appreciate you joining me today on the podcast. I appreciate your insights on the Flames, Oilers, Leafs, and other things. I appreciate you making time for me today, and hopefully you have yourself a really good call tomorrow with Peter Lombardius on Flames broadcast.
Well, I just talked about broadcasting in those old AHL buildings, and it'll be great to be back at an NHL building tomorrow night. One of the challenges for us this year is calling road games off a monitor. We're doing our best, John, but it's a challenge. Some nights more than others, but it's a ton of fun to bring Flames games to you and to all the fans out there. Thanks for having me. Thanks for doing this, and look forward to watching your podcast moving forward.
Thanks, Derek. And hey, like I always say, on the games, I'm still probably going to tweet at you guys that I'm jealous if you call them NHL hockey games. So enjoy it.
Yeah, we're lucky. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Derek. Have yourself a good night.
Yeah, you too, man. Take care.